Hello and welcome to NewsMobile Live. Today we're going to be discussing the GST Bill, a bill that's taken the Indian Parliament and the Indian citizens by storm. And with us we have an expert, Girish Vanvari. Girish here has been responsible for establishing and building the M&A tax business of KPMG India over the last decade. He has built an exclusive legacy of work in the M&A deals and restructuring transactions for some of the biggest deals Indian corporate has ever seen. Welcome, Girish.
Thanks.
So we're going to be discussing about the GST bill and the bill which has its roots down to September 1993. The company you've been working on, it started in 1993, I'm assuming, Girish?
That's right.
And it has a client base of 2,700 companies. So we're going to have expert opinion on the GST bill, which is meant to unite 29 states and 1.3 billion Indian citizens. The World Bank today, Girish, it ranks India as 157th out of the total 189 countries when it comes to simplicity in taxation. What effect do you think the GST will have on this particular ranking?
Massive. That's the one word I would have.
Massive, you say?
It just shows that India can come together and pass a reform which is good for the country. Obviously, the rankings are a survey which happens speaking to a lot of people, and the effect in the upgrading of that ranking will happen over a period of time.
Okay.
But certainly, integrating 29 states, coming with a common law which emerges into 17 laws into one, and in a world where Brexit is happening, Europe is disintegrating, there is elections in the US, and here is a country coming together with so many people. What an opportunity this can be. So this will surely show that the government can execute complex reforms. So it's a good beginning.
Girish, while you said that, I'd like to quote Arvind Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor, who calls this whole construct of the GST bill a voluntary pooling of sovereignty in the name of cooperative federalism. And he's borrowing directly from the EU's common market system, which happened a decade ago. So, do you think the whole GST bill is in line with the European common market that happened a decade ago?
It's actually more than that. Because in the European market, the complexity of taxation system was not as diverse as the 17 laws in different states in India are. So I would say this is bigger than the EU coming together. Yes, leave the currency part aside for the EU, which was a big thing which EU achieved, that was the euro. But on the movement of goods, with the complexity which we have on entry taxes, on VAT, on excise, on service tax, the complexity spanning around 29 different states, running over years, converging into one, is I think a bigger reform even than the EU coming together under one sector.
Okay, so you say it's a bigger reform than the EU coming together, and we have reports about how the GST might boost the Indian GDP by about 1.5 to 2%, definitely. One more question, the next question which we have for you is, yesterday Rajya Sabha, what we passed was the constitutional amendment to the bill. And there's still many procedures and steps that are left for the passage of this bill in various state legislatures and then Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So, considering the complexity of this bill and the number of stages and the number of laws which have to be passed, do you think a date of 1st April in the next financial year is achievable, as the finance minister has said and quoted?
So I think the steps to be followed are very simple. First is this bill goes back to the Lok Sabha, since there are some amendments, which I think should be a formality because the existing party has a super majority in the Lok Sabha. Then this big bill goes back to the states, and it has to be passed by 50% of the states. That's going to take some time. And assuming that happens in the next 2-3 months. So by December, you'll have this central GST law, state GST law, and integrated GST law in place. And really the key in all this is what rate should be there. Should it be 18%, 20%? How closer it should be to 18? And how diverse it will be from 18? Because even the revenues have to be matched. And that's the eye to be had. So there is a consensus which is required for the rate, and that is where some debates will happen. That is where you will have the opposition party again having some issues. So if that rate hurdle is crossed, then April 1 looks to be a reality. But if that rate hurdle takes more time, because whatever I am hearing is that the government is ready with the IT infrastructure for GST. So really the IT backbone is ready. If the rate consensus is reached by December, then it may actually be a reality in April. But if that's going to take a couple of months more till the state approvals come through, then you may just see this spilling over to October.
So the whole deadline, it revolves around the implementation and the passage by the state legislatures,
Correct.
according to you.
Correct. But I think the intent is to move swiftly, and the intent is to make April 1 happen. So I think the government is positive with whatever I see and hear.
Definitely. And moving on to that, from that, we know that the GST basically it is a unified taxation system, pardon. And what do you think, does the government have the technology to actually integrate all the taxes that currently exist in the country under a unified taxation system?
That's right. I mean, they want to integrate one into GST, and the idea would be to take away all the bottlenecks, make the transition happen as smooth as it can be, and really the key will be how the credit system works, how the input and output system will work over a period of time, so that there are no leakages. The other aspect to be really taken care of is how will the existing tax holidays work, tax incentives, tax concessions, like you have northeastern states, Himachal Pradesh's tax holidays, how will they submerge into GST? So there are lots of areas where clarifications will be required, and clearly the whole businesses will change of people. Say for example, the whole supply chain will change, because today you may have a particular supply chain with the bottlenecks in the supply chain. I was reading some reports which said that if you moved goods from Delhi to say Bangalore, if it took 11 days, it's going to take 7 days now. Because the octroi checkpost will not be there, there will be no delay in waitings, which can really cut down the inventory holding time significantly. So it's going to be extremely interesting to see how this whole thing pans out. And if everything goes well, then clearly the enhancement is huge in terms of GDP, because you will have no unaccounted money. If you have the GST mechanism, everything will be official, which will lead to accounting for all trades happening in the country. Second is GST will lead to more investments, because manufacturing is going to be boosted, which will boost the GDP of this country. And third and most, I mean, if you look at, if everything converges, monsoons, interest rates and GST,
yes,
I mean, double digit looks to be a reality.
So while we've said that the GST will definitely help with the supply chain management, the next question to you is that in the short term, the direct benefit is to the small and mid-cap companies due to the economies of scale. As you said, the supply chain management will be a great improvement because of the vanishing checkposts at each and every state. But the mom and pop companies, that is essentially the private and the small companies that currently weren't under the radar of the taxation system, will definitely hit. And these small companies, they employ people which is at the rate of 6 times, to compare to small and mid-cap companies. So what effect do you think the GST will have on the common man?
To the common man, first impact is going to be inflationary. Because if you look at the common staples, pharma, which is medicines, footwear, textiles, some parts which are presently exempt or low layer of taxation will come up with GST rate. So first reaction is going to be inflationary, because everyday items may be a little more expensive, and the estimates that will reach between 0.2 or 0.7% in terms of inflation. In terms of job creation, if you look at all the countries around the world are moving towards accountable economies. So if you look at the black money law, if you look at the overseas affairs, and GST is also one step to even take away black money out. So the smaller companies which were doing cash dealings, which were not paying taxes, are at one time going to come under the tax. And it's good for them, because then they can raise money, they can get more finance, everything is legitimized, and that's how they'll sustain in the longer run. So I think if you take the temporary glitch of a change out, which is like the mindset change, that you have to comply with the law, eventually they will all be better off. Because you can't live in a world without having accountable behavior.
So it increases for the accountable behavior for the taxman, and more people will come into the taxing lens, the taxation lens. Now moving on to the next point, we've discussed about how the GST will result in removal of all these checkposts which block the supply chain management, and definitely these removal of checkposts will give a boost to the economy. However, we also have a provision in the GST where the states are actually asking for 1% levy charge while they cross the borders, and some businessmen and companies have actually reported about how this is going to in fact increase the costs and promote the number of importing materials will get much cheaper instead of rather moving from state to state, because this 1% levy on crossing the border is also from, let's say, moving from one factory to another factory within the same company. So what do you have to say to that?
I think that's what I just said, that the rates are the key now. How will the central sales tax work? How will the rates work? What will be the maximum rate which will be there? So now all eyes on the rates. So what do I say to that? The lower the rate, the better it is. If 1% is not there, that's more integrated. But then again, we are also managing a fiscal deficit. We have to spend to grow infrastructure. We have to spend to kickstart the economy. And how do you balance? How do you balance a lower rate with the demands? And there's always a trigger effect. When you have a new tax, it takes time for collections to pick up. So this interim period, how do you balance, is going to be key to watch. So it's going to be very interesting in the next 3 to 4 months to see what this rate works out and how this whole thing pans out.
Okay, and my last question to you, Girish, will be about about how the Make in India campaign is in its full bloom right now, and even the World Bank and IMF have actually said that India is the place to invest. So what impact do you think GST will have on institutional investors when it comes to investing in India, and the impact on Make in India campaign?
It's going to be very positive because it's walking the talk. To make in India happen, manufacturing has to be boosted. To make manufacturing happen, reforms have to happen. And GST is the single biggest reform which supports manufacturing. Besides all the other concessions you saw, which is Startup India, Digital India, which all enable Make in India. This is the biggest reform to make in India a reality. So I think by this, the government is actually walking the talk.
Okay. So this is in fact going to boost the Make in India campaign, and in fact it does provide and gives people a hope for institutional reforms where the government is hoping to make business in India, creating and launching businesses in India easier, right?
That's right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Girish, for joining us today on our NewsMobile special live. And for all our viewers out there, you can tune in for this live and you can watch it later on our website www.newsmobile.in. Thank you so much. Stay tuned in for all the latest updates. Thank you.